Welcome to the World Extreme Medicine podcast. My name's Will Duffin. Right now, many of us medics on the front line are practicing extreme medicine on our doorsteps. In response to this at WEM, we've reached out to our network of incredible humans, from master divers, anaesthetists, wingsuit pilots, nurses, mountaineers, to astronauts, to reveal what we can learn from their work that will both inspire us and help us. My guest today is Mark Visser. Mark is an Australian professional big wave surfer, an ocean adventurer, author, keynote speaker. He's best known for being the first person to surf Jaws, that's Hawaii's most dangerous wave, at night. And he has been coaching professional athletes, including Kelly Slater. He's been coaching football teams, the Navy SEALs, the SAS, range of different high performing teams about training to overcome fear, about dealing with stressful situations both in and out of the water. And his work is all about how humans process fear. Mark's joining us today from the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. How are you, Mark?
Good, mate. Good. Just thought I'd throw out my little disclaimer. If you hear any noises in the background, it's I'm in the home office, so I was just laughing then. Going, I hope this can you can hear what's going on.
Hey, Mark, no worries. That is the world we're living in. Everyone's working at home, so you might hear my 10-month-old as well at some point. He'll chime in, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's a real pleasure to have you on the podcast. You're very welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm so privileged to be here, and the work that everyone's doing in that, like you said, in that front line is, it just doesn't get credited enough, and I think it's a true honour to even be able to say a word or two. I'm truly humbled by everything that everyone does in this space, and it really makes you realise how important that kind of stuff is when it's sort of laid out in a situation like the one that we're in right now.
Yeah. And how are things on the Sunshine Coast at the moment?
It's definitely not as extreme as what's happening in other countries, and possibly even in Australia in general. The state is in lockdown, so no one can enter the borders and things like that. And everyone's pretty good at sticking to the rules. Like, there were people that were dismissing it and thinking, "Oh, it's just an old person's virus." And but they've just gotten stricter and stricter, and I think that's sort of been the key, is everyone's sort of just waking up and realizing that it's not just going to go away. Like, the longer people stuff around, the longer it's going to be around. So it definitely feels like people are getting the message, and I really feel like there's a lot of things, after this that will be such awesome lessons learned, even in just general hygiene and so many things that people were just clueless about, which I think is awesome.
And as a surfer, how are you finding not being able to get in the ocean at the moment?
Well, I'm lucky enough that I live very close to the ocean, so I think they're just restricting driving to other spots. So if you can walk to your surf spot or whatever, you're okay. So I'm very fortunate in the sense that I can do that. But I think it'd be a hard pill for me to swallow. Like, I literally would be a fish out of water.
That must be the last bastion for you. That's a real lifeline, being able to get in the sea still, I'm sure. And so what I'd like to do, Mark, is just talk a little bit about some of the work that you do and how what kind of coaching you give to some of these teams that help them process fear, that might help medics on the front line going in some really challenging and uncertain times. Let's start first of all. Let's talk about some of the stuff that you've done, because it's really interesting. Let's go back to 2011, and this was the huge moment in your career as a big wave surfer when you took on Jaws. Tell me about that.
Well, the truth of that story is, deep down, I was afraid, and I was trying to prove to myself that I wasn't. That's the short answer to the whole process. So if we were to jump back, a fair few years, when I was a kid, I nearly drowned. and I was born out in the countryside, so in the farmlands, miles away from any ocean or beach. And I nearly drowned at the age of 3. I fell into a sheep's trough, and my brother pulled me out by my hair before I drowned. But apparently, I wouldn't go near a bath or wouldn't go near water for a really, really long time. And I didn't actually learn to swim properly till I was about 10. And I had a over energy or a real anxiety around not being in control when I was in the water, or if anything got slightly, uncomfortable, I just really felt that, and I never really knew what it was. And it wasn't until I was older that my parents kind of had reminded me of those experiences, and I could really feel that feeling. So I started competing as a normal surfer as I went on, but I was still very timid. When I say normal surfer, I competed in normal small wave events, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I was really challenging myself to want to surf bigger waves. And why I was doing that, and it's only now that I can see it, was I was trying to prove to that inner child that I wasn't afraid, and I didn't know that, and I was literally just driving myself to the edge every single time, and I really didn't know why. And every time I was doing it, I was absolutely terrified. I was so scared, and I was like, why do I keep coming back for this? Like, and I never really knew. I just knew that I had to. I didn't know why, and it was quite odd. And then that particular project at in Maui, over in Hawaii, the wave is called Piahi, or it's known as Jaws. That to me was the ultimate test to prove, because I'd ridden all the best big wave spots all around the world, but I thought, well, that would be the ultimate test to prove to myself that I wasn't afraid. And it's quite silly that you would, or any individual would have to go to that length to do that. And it wasn't until that actually happened that I could see how silly that was, well, ego driven that was. But it also allowed me to really understand how humans and how I process fear. And then there was a process that was going on, and so from that experience, I really learned a lot, and then I was able to turn that around and help a lot of other people. And there's an actual physical process that we go through, not just an emotional process, but they're linked. They're very heavily, closely linked, and it's funny because in the courses and programs that we teach, like I work with business professionals, people that don't have anything to do with the water or sports. It's the exact same thing. If there's a situation where we're dealing with high stress, high fear, whatever that is, the process is exactly the same. And it's funny when you mentioned to give advice to people in your field, because our best coaches are paramedics, and the reason they're our best coaches is they have the best ability to stay calm in situations of chaos. When they rock up to a scene of something that would blow a normal person's mind, people in that field have the ability to remain calm. And what that really does is changes the system within your body. Where there's the mind-body connection, what that's actually doing is a whole process. So, for example, if we have a fear or whatever that is, it creates an emotion, which then affects our nervous system and then flows out through our body. And then we react to that whole situation versus responding to it. Whereas I often find that our paramedic coaches would be the ones that respond to situations versus react to them. And that's something that we actually teach. And so it's hard for me to say or try and give advice, because I sort of salute people in this space at the highest regard because of their ability to do that. But it might even be as simple as pointing out the fact that there is a connection between the mind, body, and soul, and a process of how that actually unfolds. That's something that I was extremely interested in, and I spent a lot of time working with professionals from all around the world to understand that process. Almost to the point where, I was in Ubud in the forest working with someone consistently for about a year and a half. And then there was individuals there that had worked for 15 years on one section of the brain, and then we're dealing with energy and koshas and all this other stuff. And I kind of had to go to the point where I'd sort of gone so far that no one would really comprehend what I was saying, and I might sound like a full-blown hippie, but to then bring it back and then put it into a practical space. And the line there is very close, but it's just a matter of being able to articulate what that actually is. So I think that's been a really cool journey, and it's something that is far more rewarding for me to share than going and riding a big wave and banging my chest about it.
Yeah, but it sounds like you've used yourself as the test case. You've explored fear and your response to fear through your surfing, and then you've been able to then share that learning through the courses, the Ocean Warrior, and the other kind of educational activities that you're now doing.
100%. And I've been back there again and again. So once, I overcame the water element, a new project I'm working on right now became a project where we had to parachute out of airplanes into an ocean swell. And then, I'd spent my life trying to become comfortable in the water. And then all of a sudden I'm thrown into a new environment where I'm like, shit, I'm not good in this space, and back through that same process. But then I started to learn. I was like, oh, this is the same. This is the same thing that's happening. This is the same process that's happening. And that's when it really became interesting, because I was like, I've dealt with that. I actually know how that works. And then I applied the same sort of techniques, and I could see that it was the same process, that how we function, how we take on an emotion, and how that physically affects the breakdown of how our body will function. So that was really important, because I was like, I can actually change that. Like, people often talk about, oh, positive thinking and this and that. This is a step back beyond that. That's actually changing the physical body versus even what you're thinking. By changing the physical body, you can almost enhance what you're going to think by doing that. So that was a really interesting process, and that's where I've been really helpful for elite athletes, business professionals, because they know this themselves, and they're often in this state where basically they're shutting down a certain section of their brain and allowing themselves just to do what they do best. But it was just reminding them of what actually is going on and explaining it to them in a way that seems quite rational. So that's probably what's going on, I suppose.
So, what I'd like to do is for our listeners is help them to understand the fear associated with big wave surfing. Now, I'm a very average surfer. But I have experienced getting the shit kicked out of me. I've had my ass handed to me in various parts of Indonesia and cloud break in Fiji, and I know a little bit about what it feels like to get dragged over a reef and feel totally out of your depth. But that is what's it like when those waves are scaled up, when we're talking 60, 70 plus foot waves breaking in front of you, and you're being held down for many minutes? What does that feel like, Mark?
The brutality of it is so intense, to the point where sometimes you literally feel like, can my arm be strained any further? Like, I've seen my heels like here somewhere, and I'm like, I don't think I could ever do that in any yoga pose ever in my life. Like, but the ocean can throw you in that position so quickly, and to the point where I'm like, is my back gonna break? And like things like, you just feel like your whole face is gonna get ripped off. It's the intensity of something like that is so intense. But once you start to understand the process of it, it I wouldn't say you ever get to the point where it feels like nothing, but you get to the point where you understand what's coming, and you can deal with it easier.
Yeah, does it get easier? But each time.
The truth is, it gets easier from understanding the process and understanding the training. By doing the training and being prepared, any situation of high stress becomes easier, because what you're really doing is minimizing stress. And in a situation that was once overwhelming, if you've minimized the stress and prepared for this, and this, the A, B, C's, and D's, all these possible scenarios, your heart rate's not going to be increased. So that's what goes back to that same process. So, like, if we can keep the shell, the body, whatever we want to call it, if we can keep that process calm, you can go through anything. And that's the whole process of fear, because the only difference between, say, you and I in a situation of, a traumatic experience is your knowledge. You'll see something that I don't know, and I'll go, "Holy shit! Oh, what will we do here?" Where you'd know and you'd be calm. So, but what is the difference between us right there in that moment is your physiology, your breathing, your ability to just remain calm and know what to do the next step. Whereas if I went into a state where all of a sudden I was out of that state, I'm irrational. I'm reacting versus responding. So that's the process. A really quick flick can happen there and send someone off the edge. But that's a really quick flip can go back and pull them back. So it's just about um, understanding that process and essentially learning to do what feels right versus. So if you can go above thinking, because that sounds really odd and it sounds a bit out there, but the process is really teaching yourself how to feel, because that's a quicker response than thinking, because you're using the lower consciousness, the lower memory versus the other section of your brain, which you can respond to how something feels. That's a faster process. That's almost ahead of time.
Yeah, wow. And Mark, so a big part of what you teach your ocean warriors is about breath holding. How long can you hold your breath for?
6:04, 6 minutes 4 seconds.
Wow. And how on earth do you get it that long?
Well, in the breath hold world, that's actually not that long. There's a lot of guys that are all in the 9, 10, whatever, and some people go to as far as breathing in pure oxygen and can hold their breath forever, for really, really long times. But what I've learned personally is the big long breath holds, for me personally, in an ocean situation, are only good for my ego. They're only good for talking shit at the pub. Because the reason behind that is that environment is never still. That environment is not exactly like the environment that you can hold your breath for 6 minutes and 4 seconds in. So the training I do now is never about the big breath holds. So no more pub talking for me.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, so how you teach people to do it is a process. You go through a process, and it's removing barriers of unknown. Once again, you keep going back to that space of, you get to a point and it's over 2 minutes. Oh, what's happening? This is happening to my body. So then the mind then says, oh, we're dying. So then fear comes in, everything starts to panic. The body then responds. Whereas when you understand that the second time, you're like, no, you're not dying. You're having a blood shift or a contraction, which is blood moving from your legs, coming up to your heart to keep you alive. Yeah, okay, you can remain calm through the first lot of contractions. So the process keeps going until you understand and become calm with what is actually physically happening to your body to allow you.
Sounds a little bit like childbirth.
Well, I can't speak for my wife. I'm definitely sitting on the sideline there. But yeah, I suppose the second time round, definitely they always often say it's not as full on for them, because the first time there's so many unknowns.
So what you're saying is, with training and conscious effort, you can overcome some of that emotion and panic that starts to well up when you're in extraordinarily stressful situations.
Correct, absolutely, and you can go through a process even if you're going into uncharted territory, even if you're going into an area of unknowns. You can actually minimize that process before you actually get there. Like, okay, well, what am I afraid of? What am I afraid that might happen? Okay, let's look at that. So it's really about being okay with looking in the dark corners. And then when you've looked at every dark corner, and I take it to the extreme when I'm planning these projects, I'm not dancing around the possible facts. And when I look at those and I'm really clear of what those are, then it becomes quite clear on how that process would work. And what that does is causes a sense of calmness, because you're aware of what's going on and all the possible things that could or could not happen, and then you prepare for the absolute best. And by doing that, there's a sense of calmness that comes over you, because you're not just. It's not like often people think, say in the sport of big wave surfing, that people are madmen. They just jump off these crazy waves, and some of the guys do. They are mad. And me personally, I would consider myself nowhere near as courageous as some of the big wave surfers, because I'm quite calculated in my process. I don't look at it when I take off on a huge wave. I'm not looking at it like, well, it's a 50-50 chance that I make it. I'm like, it's a 95% chance that I make it, because I feel like I've done and prepared for everything. And if it doesn't, I'm not afraid of the consequences, because that's how you put yourself in that situation, to set yourself up to win at whatever you do, because you don't leave things to chance.
And presumably, you know that if you wipe out, if you get swallowed by one of these monsters, you've done the training, you've done the preparation, you're in a position where you can deal with that
Correct. And without the safety mechanisms that we have, so now we have inflatable vests where you pull a thing on your chest and your whole vest floats up. And the training I would do was I would get dropped off on the back of a jet ski in front of a set on purpose to be ready for what's happening with all these safety devices on, understand it, and then take them off, get used to dealing with it without it. So then when I was in those situations, it was just like I've been through this again and again in so many different ways. And it seems over the top, but it's for me, it's what makes me be able to do what I do.
Yeah. Is it so? Lots of your training is exposing yourself to that stimulus, being in really risky situations that will induce that fear response. But how do you suggest people can become more courageous when they're not able to be out there in the ocean riding big waves, when they're perhaps just at home reflecting on things? Is what kind of techniques could people use then?
Vulnerability is the biggest one. And when you even said, putting myself in risky situations, I'm like, no, I haven't done that. Because it sounds crazy, but I'm like, no, I've never been in those because I've always put myself in the situation that at the time was a measured one. But to answer your question, people in other spaces, the biggest way to kind of start to shed the layers, I call it armor, right? We all have these layers of armor, and really what it is our ego or our overthinking mind to protect ourselves from being humiliated, to protect ourselves from being exposed to something that someone might think that we are or aren't, but the truth is we are just who we are. So the fact of that is when you are okay with being you and you shed your armor or all these layers of protection that we put up, you become vulnerable. But by doing that, you also start to accept yourself. You also start to be okay with being you. And you also start to accept that you can see things from a rational point of view. Then you can actually measure what's going on, because a lot of the time we put up these fronts of, oh, yeah, everything's fine, everything's fine. And we do it to protect ourselves because we don't want to seem weak, or we don't want to seem like all these different things. And I think, in the greatest teams or groups, organizations that I've worked with, one of the key abilities for success is for an internal group to be vulnerable amongst each other, and to look at things from real perspectives, and then to grow and support each other with the same vision in hand. I think that's kind of the process. And as an individual, we all have our own teams, whether it just be our spouse, or it could be just one person that we really trust. So that's probably the process that I'd look at it in. And when we get real with ourselves, that's when we can finally relax, because so often we're taught that we have to be a certain way or do a certain thing, and that's all bullshit, really. You've got to just be you. And if you can't be you, well, who can you be?
Because a lot of the teams you've worked with, Mark, I mean, these are big, tough guys, right? These are football players, Navy SEALs. There's no shortage of egos in teams like that. I would imagine. Uh, how do you encourage those individuals to check their egos at the door, to expose their own vulnerabilities to the rest of the team, as you've just described?
Well, what I find too is the more professional the group, the higher the tier that I'm working with, the more okay they are to accept that. Even though you would think they'd be heavily ego driven, it's normally the ones that aren't quite there that have the biggest egos, because they're trying to prove something that they're actually not. And that's the biggest thing that holds us back from learning. That's the biggest thing that stops us from progressing. And if I used it in a very simple example, if someone was trying to learn to surf, and they were embarrassed about how they might look, it slows their learning process down. Whereas a young person would paddle out and they don't care if they fall off, if they lose their pants, or if they look silly. They're just having fun, and they learn really, really quick. And the thing is, ability wise, an older person actually has the ability to learn faster. They've got more strength. They're stronger. Their agility might be better, whatever that is. And so that's the thing, is that's what actually stops us from growing and learning. I don't know if I actually answered your question then.
I mean, so your own motivation for continuing to put yourself in dangerous situations. I mean, do you feel that you have an ego, that you have something to prove to the rest of the surfing community, or indeed to yourself still, or have you been able to fully compartmentalize that in
Yeah, I think I did. I think I definitely had a big ego, and I was really worried about what people thought, and wanted to try and prove that I was this or that I was that. And then I got over that. Then I could see it for what it was, and I could just really realize that, well, none of that really matters. And I started to tap into who I was as a person, and then I was able to really work on what felt right. And so I go back to that process of learning to do what feels right, which is the same kind of thing, which is kind of a form of emotional intelligence, because you're a step ahead of thinking. And then I was quickly able to kind of realize that. Yeah, none of that sort of stuff really matters, and I'll still do challenges, but the purpose and the intention of why I do it is very different. It might be something that could seem egotistical, but my reasoning would be to show and to share with people the ability that we all have. Versus prior to it, it was, oh yeah, just to prove that I'm the greatest, or whatever the ego version of myself wanted. Whereas I don't feel like I deal with that anymore. But who knows, if I do, and I'll pull myself up for sure, or hopefully people close to me will too.
So, Mark, a lot of the big wave spots on this earth are close to shore. They're breaking over reefs along the coastline. But you've been looking for waves out in the open ocean. Tell me about that.
Well, yeah, it was after the Night Rider project. The biggest thing from that was it allowed me to take the cap off where my limiting thoughts were. It made me realize, look, I wanted to do this project, and at the time, everyone said there's no way that could be done, and the best of the best said that. And now if I said to someone, "Oh yeah, could you say that?" Everyone's, "Oh yeah, yeah, we could all go surf, this spot at night, and it'd be fun." Whereas at the time, no one was saying that. And they were all saying, especially like myself and the background that I came from, was like, there's no way that can be achieved, and that was like kind of considered a suicide mission. So from doing that, it really changed my perspective of what was possible. So then I started searching, thinking, well, if the biggest wave ridden at this current time was about 80 foot, why and where would there possibly be something bigger? And then I really just started to try and figure out that equation of what was going on and why. And I started working with some of the military guys, some underwater experts that understood a lot of information about things that I had no clue about. Got access to some satellite data from 25 years back from this point, and then started referencing all sorts of things. And on days that known surf spots were really good, I was flying reconnaissance planes out in the middle of nowhere, checking these supposed spots. And a lot of my friends at the time were like, what have you done? Have you quit? Like, why aren't you surfing? Why aren't you at this swell or that? And I wasn't really saying anything. I was just off doing my kind of thing. And
It's all on the down low.
yeah, it was. Well, it's because it's funny. It's in sports sometimes. Everyone tends to just copy, or like if someone has a good idea, oh cool, we'll just do that too, instead of their own kind of thing. So I kind of learnt from the first time around that, yeah, I'll just do my own thing and focus on that. But what happened was I did find a few spots that were 100 foot, so bigger than the bigger waves that had broken on the shores or the coastlines that are close to home. But these particular waves were out in the middle of nowhere, and the only way really to get to them was to, as I mentioned earlier, was to fly, say like a C-130 or some type of military aircraft in, and then parachute out. Because if you were driving a boat out there, which is the logical sort of response to it, is the forecast changes. And they're so far out, you could be driving the boat, which takes 4 days to get there. 2 days in, the forecast could change, and then you're constantly driving out and coming back. So whereas the plane can get there in 14 hours, so it's just when it's 100% on, you go. The whole team goes out, and a few jet skis go with it, and then we deploy a life raft, and we wait for that rescue boat to come and get us afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And what does it feel like to you're in that C-130, you're about to jump out the bottom, you've deployed the jet ski, and you're about to go next, and you're about to launch yourself into that ocean. What does that feel like?
Terrifying, so scary. The first few training drills, I was so scared that I don't reckon I could even feel my legs. Like I was just like I could barely feel my feet underneath me. But yeah, it was.
You're just jumping into nothing, just blue ocean.
Yeah, and we exit from about 5,000 feet, which is not too low. In skydiving terms, it's like what they call a hop and pop. So you jump out and you've got about 10 seconds to get stable and then pull your line, pull your chute. So you've got a bit of time if something goes wrong. But yeah, it's just one of those things where you've got like you said, a 360-degree view of ocean. There's no land reference. There's nothing below you, and you've never felt more insignificant in your life ever than that moment. So we've done the actual training for it, and the main event is sort of something that's in the process right now.
Yeah, and in surfing folklore, there's this big thing about the 100-foot wave. Has it ever been surfed? Has anyone surfed a 100-foot wave?
Well, a lot of people have sort of said that was close or this one could be, but officially not yet. The biggest one, I think, is 86 foot at Nazaré in Portugal. But yeah, I mean, it's that would be egotistical of me to say that, oh yeah, I'm only doing it for that. For me, this particular project is really about exploration and seeing if we can go above and beyond what we rationally normally can do. That's what really excites me. I know there are waves there that have broken at that sort of height at the particular location that I've found, and it would be awesome to be able to experience what that is like to ride one that big. But who knows? Who knows if it's possible? Well, only time will tell.
Yeah, I suppose that's a huge transition from competing as a on the QS, the World Qualifying Series when you were in your younger days, to transitioning to this world now, where it's not about maximizing your wave count. It's not about the glory and rising up the rankings. It's a completely different ball game.
Totally, yeah, totally. And to be honest, I get the most enjoyment out of helping people. That's something that for me has been the most rewarding thing ever. With the courses that we do and the programs that we do, like yeah, it's great working on awesome missions like this one, the Deep Blue project that we're talking about. But it's so satisfying seeing someone go through the process of what we teach and having them come out changed, and seeing that happen, and that is so rewarding.
Yeah, I bet. And so you're a dad. How old are your kids?
So 1 and 3, 2 girls.
Great. Has that changed how you feel about undergoing really high risk activities, about doing the work that you do?
It hasn't, because I really feel that it's important that my girls grow up doing what they want to do, doing what they love. If it was extremely risky and it was something that, like, it's a roll of the dice kind of scenario, I think that would be quite reckless as a father. But for me, doing something that is within my grasp, I think it's a good example to say, girls, go and live your life and do everything that you want to do. Because if I was to say, oh no, I won't do that now, then I'm living in fear. Then I'm not living my truth. And then I'm expecting them to live their life wrapped in bubble wrap. Oh, what if this happens? And it's like, no, it's not what it's about. So I feel it's a good example as a father to set the one that you want for them, and for them to have their ultimate life is what I'd want for them, to be able to do everything they want to do within reason too, to be able to look at it and weigh things up. I think that would be awesome, because I feel that it's the most important thing for every single one of us. We all, as individuals, stop things out of fear, and that's the only reason we don't do everything that we want to do. And yeah, I think if we can live our life in that way, it's going to be a much happier life.
Yeah. So we have to embrace that fear. We have to expose ourselves to it to grow as people, to be the best version of ourselves that we can be.
100%. Yep. And that comes back straight away just to being vulnerable, just to be able to say, oh shit, I am scared, you know?
Mm.
Because in my space, it was never even said in interviews, like, oh, you're a big wave guy. And then the common response was, oh, it was just all ego. So,
Yeah.
whereas I'm just like, nah, I'm scared. Yeah, totally scared. Like,
I'm okay with that.
yeah, but that's right. But then but I was able to grow and learn faster because I wasn't afraid of, and out of my fear, I developed some of the best underwater training things there are. Like, I learnt techniques that save my life and many people's other lives. And had I been closed off to that, I wouldn't be in this situation. So it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's amazing. That is amazing. I suppose from a health worker point of view, one thing that I've really taken from our conversation is this idea of having a moment of reflection where you think about what your fears actually are. And it sounds like you unpack those individually and you analyze them, and then you try and think, well, actually, how likely is that scenario? And that really helps you to gain a bit more perspective. And I think I've been, over the last month or so, I've been doing that with this COVID pandemic. I think a lot of my own fears around what was happening with what's the risk that my family are going to catch this, that the work is really going to struggle with the staffing, that we're going to run out of personal protective equipment, that the whole of society is going to crumble, and it just kind of goes out from there. And I think the more I've been able to just think about those and compartmentalize them and actually realize that the probability of any of those individual things is actually quite low, that I think I've been able to reach a place of acceptance, which has only happened really in the last week, I think.
Yeah, wow. And that's cool. And what you really sort of explained there too is the same sort of thing I was mentioning, is you just minimize you sort of talked about a situation, and then when you assess it and look at it from every angle, all you did is minimize the stress, the anxiety, the fear within yourself. And that allowed you to kind of go through that process. And I think that's something that would really help everyone to be able to understand that, to be able to kind of go through that process and look at things from every angle, and look in the dark corners and be aware of everything. But then, because at the end of it all, like, you can live in a massive mansion, and if everyone in your family is miserable and unhappy, there's no point being there. There really isn't. You'd rather be, and it sounds, people think that that's crazy statement, I'd rather be in a tent if I knew that my wife and my girls were so stoked, instead of being somewhere where it seemed like the cool place to be. Because all we really want is to be able to be at peace with ourselves, so if we can find that, and how we do that is minimize stress, minimize fear, and how we do that is break those situations down, look at it for what it really is. And if there's situations that come up that we're like, oh, that's something that I'm not prepared to risk, well, then that's okay. But you understand where you're at, and you've minimized that anxiety, or that build up of tension within yourself. And then by doing that, you've gone back to what feels right. And
So are there any practices that the healthcare workers on the front line could be doing at home? Anything else that you recommend that they could do on a regular basis to cultivate more courage when they're kind of going into these very, very intense shifts where they're seeing high volumes of very sick people?
Well, I think firstly, I'm so respectful of the people in this space that I wouldn't like to proclaim that I know something that they probably already don't. So I just wanted to say that. The thing that I find for me personally that helps the most in situations of high stress is just checking in with how I'm breathing and what my posture is. So changing the physiology of my body will change how I feel, and being aware of how I'm actually breathing in these situations of whatever it is that's coming. And I'd presume most of the people in that space would understand that. But whether that's just a reminder of, oh yeah, geez, I didn't pay attention to whether I was hunched over or whether I was sitting upright, allowing my organs to let oxygen pass through them freely. And I'd go to nose breathing. It's something I always do to minimize my brainwave activity, lower my heart rate, really calm everything down. So simply, if they're driving to a job, if they're driving to a situation, allow yourself, might be 2, 3, 5 minutes of just breathing through the nose, it will drop down those brainwave that noise. It'll drop down that heart rate, which then activates the cognitive thinking part of your brain, which allows you to see things really clear and calm. So just minimizing the noise, which I feel a lot of these individuals would know, and that really helps so much because it just allows you to be in the now, in that moment, like right here, right now. And when you can do that, that's when you can operate at your best. That's the state of shutting down the noise, so to speak, and just getting in their flow state where they can do their absolute best.
So you're talking there about the power of just simple breathing techniques. Are there any specific breathing patterns that you would recommend?
Yep. So just making sure that you're breathing out longer than in. So if I was going in through my nose, it would simply be, let's say I did it on a 4 count, like if I was going, and I can go back out through my mouth or my nose, it doesn't matter, but that I was breathing out for, say, 6 seconds. So if I was going in for 4, I'm going out for 6, because by doing that, I'm releasing more carbon dioxide and I'm going to oxygenate my body in a higher way. So I'd be doing that on purpose because that actually makes me start to feel good. The other key thing is if things are bad and it's a tricky situation. This is what I actually do, and I don't mean to sound in any way like I'm being disrespectful, but by physically forcing yourself to smile, whether it be making, like, might be with a colleague saying something that will crack a smile, you're going to release endorphins, dopamine, serotonin to your brain. It's a natural way to actually make yourself feel good, which blocks out pain, which blocks out the other feelings, and allows you to be in that state. So they're quick things that I'll do. Like if a huge wave's about to smash me and I'm looking up and I can see someone beside me that's really scared, on purpose, I'll say things like, "Holy shit," like I'll joke and make fun of it, and I'll see them smirk. But by doing that, all I really did is took them out of their holy shit reacting, state, versus allowing to, because it's happened before, and I have multiple examples of situations like that. But that's another key little thing there. So whether you feel like smiling or not, and you're in a shit situation, I'd be smiling and I'd be breathing through my nose and I'd be doing it for 5 minutes because it changes how I feel. And I keep saying that all the time, but how I feel is everything, because then that changes how everything looks and comes my way.
And there's an amazing study where they got participants to hold a pencil between their teeth. So they were holding a smiling position, and they compared some of their brain chemicals to participants that were actually smiling, and they found that they released those same chemicals. So just the activating those muscles in your face, even if you're not genuinely smiling from your face, is as powerful.
100%. That's exactly right, and that's why I recommend that, and that's why I'll the people that do my program, where we're onto them with their physiology, and some of them will say to me, oh, I'm freaking out about this, and I'll say, cool, freak out about it. I don't give a shit, but change your body posture and do this. And they look at me like, what? And I'll change the physiology of how their body's structured, and then they realize, they're like, oh, he's effing with my head, and then it's like all I did is change your body posture, which allowed you to feel a certain way. And that's exactly right. By doing that, it changes the chemical response that comes to our brain. So yeah, like, I can honestly say I've never been stoned in my life. I don't go near drugs, and I think if you can stick to these kind of principles, you're high on life.
So Mike Tyson famously said, "Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face." Let's say, as medics, we've done all that prep. We're going into that shift and we're feeling ready. But then, much like getting towed in at Jaws and then wiping out, we get our asses handed to us, and it all the shit hits the fan, and we're freaking out, and it's all getting a bit much, and we need to take a bit of a time out. What would you suggest we could do in that situation where the plan has failed and everything seems very overwhelming, and we're in the moment, we're in at war?
Yeah, I would pull it back to that initial response, what I'd be doing prior to a situation like that, because you have to ask yourself, how would you want your body to function in the most optimum level? Like, how would you function if you were ready to do something the best you could do? And if I said, write it down, what's it look like? How would you breathe? What would your breathing rate look like be? What would your posture be like? How would you feel? So if you knew what that was, then you're smart enough to know that right now everything's turned to shit. You're in chaos. If you stay there, that's gonna continue. So you have a choice. Then you have a choice on how you feel. You don't have a choice on the situation. You can't control outcomes. That's trying to predict the future, but you can control right now. And right now, in this situation of total shit, whatever it is, you can control how you feel. And how you do that is go back to the state, putting yourself in the state that you want to be in by changing your breath, by allowing yourself to breathe properly, by going through your nose, you access all 5 lobes in your lungs. So by giving yourself that, you're going to allow that brain activity to slow down, which is going to allow you to think better. So if you knew that information in the situation that counts, why wouldn't you give yourself that? So straight away you can do something. And if it still turns out to be shit, you're giving yourself every chance you can to be the best you can and do the absolute best you can. And that's all any individual can ever ask of themselves. So I think that's one of the key things and afterwards I've been in many situations that have failed, and situations where I've tried to achieve something that was so unachievable, and I just remember thinking, oh, it's failed again and again. But I'd always go back to the drawing board and go, was there something else that could be done? Was there something I could have learned from this? And I've never had a situation where there wasn't, and I'm okay if there is. If I get there and I go, well, no, there's not, and this isn't going to progress, that's okay, because then I know I've done everything I can. But 9 times out of 10, there's always something that can be changed. There's always something that can be shifted. There's always something that can help you move, function, do whatever in a better way. And if we did that, the outcome can change. We can't predict the outcomes, but we can control what's happening now. So my advice is to be aware of that and put yourself in the best position to be present in that moment and know what that actually is and what you actually want.
So you're bold in action, but humble in reflection.
I don't even know what I am. I don't know. I honestly, I've never really looked at it. I just know that you've got to give it a crack, and you've got to be okay with just being the best you can be. And if that doesn't stack up, well, you can only do your best again, and that's all you can ever ask yourself. And when you really say that and you feel what that feels like, it's really quite humbling.
Yeah, wow. And that's really fascinating, Mark. I mean, thank you so much for your time today, chatting to us and giving us some really unique insights. Is there any message that you'd like to give out to all the frontline workers, the key workers, health workers, everyone that's out there at the moment helping with this pandemic? Is there anything you'd like to say to them?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for everything that you do, for every single person. My whole body just lights up with goosebumps when I even say that. And I'm just so grateful for everything that everyone does in that space. And thank you so much. And you guys and women, everyone, you should be so proud of yourself. And just thank you.
Awesome. If people want to reach out, connect with you, Mark, how can they do that?
So we have an online course which is called theoceanwarrior.com. I'm not really here to sell anything, but you can buy those things. But I think that's probably the way that if you wanted to progress those kind of things, you can look at that sort of stuff. I have a Facebook page. I'm a bit of a shocker with that kind of thing, but I'm just contactable by the normal ways, I suppose. But I think the main thing is just don't really worry about any individual. Just do what you want to do, and hopefully that helps everyone.
Yeah, I like that. Do what you want to do. Yeah, do it for you.
100%.
Yeah, I really buy into that. I think that's really awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for your time today, Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Legend. Thanks, mate.